Hello everyone, Jared here, and in today's video, I'm going to be telling you about how you can save some money when traveling around Kenya. And with that being said, let's get into it. When it's your first time coming to Kenya, make sure that the very first thing you do is go to a Safaricom. Definitely get an M-Pesa account if you are planning on spending money here. Safaricom is one of the local carriers with service throughout Kenya. And not only do you want to go to them to get a new SIM card while you're here, but you also want to make an M-Pesa account. That's M-P-E-S-A, which is essentially a virtual wallet that you put money on and can use to purchase whatever you want almost anywhere at any time around the country. It's really convenient and easy to set up, and if you're going to be here for more than a week, I recommend you check it out. You can find Safaricom pretty much anywhere, but for foreigners, you're probably going to have a better chance of finding one if you go to a mall, since the locations there are better equipped to dealing with foreigners. And while you're at the mall, you might as well go around and check out what else the place has to offer, whether it's restaurants, the various marketplaces, in addition to other stores. Although the one thing that I should mention about malls, however, is that the prices are not going to be as cheap as what you'll find just on the street anywhere else, for any types of goods, including food. Although the food courts will be a little cheaper than the other restaurants you'll find around there. Speaking of food, it's probably important to mention here right now that depending on what city you're going to in Kenya, the prices are going to vary significantly from one city to another. For example, Mombasa, the city which I visited on the coast of Kenya, was usually much cheaper than in the capital of Nairobi. In fact, I don't think it's too much to state that you will find things at half the price in Mombasa that you will find in Nairobi, regardless of the quality of the cuisine. So if you're trying to save money when it comes to food, you probably don't want to go to too many fancy restaurants. Unless, of course, you're going for the experience. I'll give you an example. One restaurant I went to was an Asian fusion place because I wanted to see how the cuisine would be here in Nairobi. And it ended up being that something like a bibimbap was equivalent of $15, which I thought, even for back home in the United States, was quite pricey. So be prepared to potentially spend a little more for your food than you would back home if you're going to be eating out at nicer, fancier restaurants. However, if you can't avoid wanting to try out some of those unique experiences, like this restaurant, Carnivore, which is famous for having a wide assortment of proteins that you can't really find in most other places in the world, then you should know that you can also find that there are certain days and times when it's better to go to these places as well. And the prices can really make a difference, from as much as $50 per person to $30 per person. Although, if you really want to go for food on the cheap, you can always go to a marketplace, buy the produce yourself, and learn to make some of the local cuisines like what I did. Produce is generally far cheaper than what you'll find back in the United States, particularly things like tomatoes and avocados. I don't think you'll find 4 tomatoes for 20 cents back home. Try and see if you can find someone who's willing to teach you how to make the local foods. That way you can make your money go that much further for an even better experience. Moving on from food, next we have transportation. There are a lot of different modes of transportation for going around the country of Kenya, and I wouldn't particularly recommend driving yourself around, since the traffic is quite bad and you never know what you'll end up finding on the roads. However, there are generally 3 common ways of getting around the cities that you can choose to take, if you're not going to drive yourself. The first of these is the public bus, which, although it's pretty cheap, can be a little noisy. And then next is these small vehicles known as little matatus, which are modified to generally sit around a dozen people, and are not generally well maintained. I've only been in these a few times, and I can tell you from my own personal bumpy experiences that the few times I've been in them has been enough for me. And again, although it's cheap, you're not really having the best experience when you're in these. But don't lose hope, because there's still one other really good method for traveling around the city, and for relatively cheap. And that is by using your Uber app on your phone. Uber in Kenya is cheaper than it is back home in the United States. And going from one side of the city to the complete opposite end will probably cost you no more than $15. I would really recommend against using taxis because they will charge more than what the Ubers will. And they even seem to go on detours, like picking up and dropping off other people on the way, while you're really wanting to just get to your destination. So, if you want to not have to deal with others and still want to have a relatively cheap drive going around the cities, I cannot recommend Uber enough, particularly when it comes to waiting in the traffic. And it's a much nicer way to privately experience some of the scenery that you'll see along the roads. One thing to make note of, though, is that currently there is a lot of development going on throughout Kenya, particularly the roads. And it can take you a very long time to get from one end of the city to the other. Thankfully, though, most trips aren't going to take you all that long. And just going a few miles in an Uber to go from one place to another might just cost, at most, $5. And as a brief side note, if you're planning on traveling between cities in Kenya, I recommend that you go to the train station and get a ticket, since riding the train is going to be a lot cheaper than any other kind of public transport, and that's especially true of flying. I did the high-speed rail between Nairobi and Mombasa, and by using my M-Pesa account, I was able to pay the $30 for the first-class ticket online. But if you don't have the M-Pesa account, which really makes it convenient, then you'll actually have to go to the station and get the ticket there, or have someone else who has an M-Pesa account to pay for you. If you're planning to visit both of these cities, then I recommend you check it out. For this next section, I just want to briefly mention that with regards to accommodations, you can always, of course, choose to book whatever hotel you want, but you can also choose a much cheaper alternative, which is just using Airbnb. So if you don't have an Airbnb account, you should make one. Although you do need to be careful and make sure what kind of conditions you're going to be staying in the Airbnb you ultimately select. Interesting experience. It's a new day in a new Airbnb here in Nairobi, and it's not exactly as was advertised. As you can see, it wasn't really in a condition where it was meant for someone to be living in. And although everything had been great reviews for this place online, when I actually got there, it wasn't at all like the room had been in the advertisements. So, be very careful and verify ahead of time before you reach it that it's actually what you wanted. After just a quick half an hour driving to another part of the city, I already rebooked from an Airbnb that was $15 to $20 a night, and the conditions were much better here. Look at that, a functioning shower. Also, the bedroom was pretty nice too. Thank goodness. And finally, for this last section on how to spend your money when traveling around Kenya, is on what activities you should actually do and how you can save your money while doing them. For instance, like what I'm doing here, climbing to the top of the KICC building in the center of Nairobi to get this view, or going to the beach, which is ultimately something that's free. No money necessary at all except perhaps for transportation costs. Although, some activities are definitely worth spending your money on, such as going to the Bomas of Kenya in Nairobi to see ethnic music and dance, as well as the National Museum to learn about the history of the country. And these places aren't really that expensive at all, and they also don't take all that long to go through, so most places that you could want to visit can easily be done in a short amount of time. Although the one thing that will probably end up costing you more money in the long run is going to the gift shops, as well as the street markets, like the Maasai Market, where you can buy all those souvenirs that you want to bring back home. You will definitely have to learn how to bargain and get those prices down if you want to get the most out of your money when buying anything in Kenya. And last but not least of all these activities that most people come flying in from other parts of the world to experience is going on the safari. Now, there are a couple ways that you can do this. One is to go to the Nairobi National Park just outside of the city for somewhere between $100 to $200 a person for a day trip, or on a multi-day safari in one of the national parks. If you only have a short amount of time, I recommend going to Nairobi National Park. Although you won't be able to see all the animals that you'd see in all the other national parks, you still get to see things up close and personal like the giraffes, as well as all of the big five with the exception of elephants and leopards. And when I mean close up, I mean you can get really close up to the point where if you just reach out your hand outside the windows, you could actually touch some of these animals. Although, I can't say it's necessarily recommended to do that, or that it's legal. If you choose to go to the Nairobi National Park, it's definitely worth it if you go in a group, because that always helps to bring the prices down just a little bit more than if you're going by yourself. That becomes especially true when you're going to the national parks that are a lot further away from Nairobi, such as Masai Mara, where I went to for my longer safari, which took several hours for us to drive to. From what I heard, most people spend anywhere between $400 and $500, even $600 per person to be able to go on this safari for just a 3-day, 2-night trip. But if you look around on the internet, you can even find it for as cheap as $270, which is the one I ended up going for. And I do not regret this experience at all. At first, I didn't really even want to go on a safari because I was more interested in people and the culture, and I thought if I just wanted to see animals, I could always just go to a zoo, and I'd see them as close and in person as I would on safari. But it truly is an experience that is unique and worth doing, and I was proven wrong. To make your money stretch just a little bit further, the best time to go on a safari is probably between the end of July and the start of September, because that's when all the wildebeests are migrating, and you get to see the really large herds ultimately cross the river from Kenya to Tanzania. I had no expectations for what I would see, and probably going in without any expectations made this experience a lot better, particularly as I got to see all of the big five. I can't say that you'll necessarily have as good of an experience on safari as I did, but I'm sure you won't regret doing it. Well, that's pretty much it for all of my tips on how you can save a bit of money and make your money go further when traveling around Kenya. But before we conclude, there's just one last thing I want to mention briefly. There will, at times, be people who try to come up to you and try to sell you things. Whether that's out at the national parks, while you're sitting in traffic in the cities as they come up to your windows, or by people trying to scam you into buying things like coconuts for coconut water at the beach at exorbitant prices. Just be aware that these things can happen, and as long as you use caution and common sense, then you probably won't have any issues while you're traveling around Kenya. Well, I think that's about it. I hope I've helped you in deciding a little bit about how you can plan your own visit for when you come to Kenya, and I hope you come back for more future videos about my travels. Thanks for watching, and until next time.